My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 33 and co-founder of a real estate data startup, and once the silent investor who saved my family's company, Morgan and Daughters, during the financial crash. But at every meeting, every holiday toast, my name was never said out loud. I never needed praise. I just hoped that someday, when they looked at what they owned, they'd remember I helped hold it together, but they chose differently. Silence, erasure, then labeled me not committed enough to family legacy. What I didn't know is that while I was recovering from surgery, they called the lawyer and rewrote the entire trust. Quietly, legally, I was cut out. Every section, every clause, but they didn't know, and I still had the original. This story isn't about revenge. I won't cry. I won't scream. It's just a telling about how one person stepped back in without permission with a folder and email and a Christmas card without the word family in it. You don't need to be named to prove you existed, but sometimes you need to walk back into the room that erased you and write your name back in by hand. That Thanksgiving evening, I arrived on time, but no one noticed. The mountain house in Flagstaff was glowing with warm lights, the fireplace crackling cinnamon and roasted turkey in the air. Lydia was by the window, laughing with a group of my father's guests, a glass of white wine in hand. Caleb sat near the fire in his company shirt, Morgan and Daughters stitched perfectly over his chest. He looked like he was hosting a board meeting. I went into the kitchen, placed the still warm pecan pie on the counter. My mother glanced, nodded, and said, "Just leave it there, desserts later." No one asked how I was doing or how long I'd be in Arizona. Not a word. Dinner was served. 12 people at the main table. I was seated near the catering setup between Lydia's kids. They gave me the only chair without armrests. No one noticed. I silently sliced into my turkey, listening to Dad's booming laugh as Caleb talked about expanding into Nevada. After the main course, my father stood to toast. He tapped his glass gently. "I want to celebrate Lydia," he began, eyes locked on my sister for keeping the legal side of the company so smooth the last 2 quarters, and Caleb for locking in the West Side resort deal. "You two make this family proud. No one mentioned me. Not a word about the valuation software I built, saving the company hundreds of thousands in mispriced assets. No one recalled how I emptied my startup savings at 26 to help them pay off the Lakewood estate taxes. I didn't need applause. I just wanted to know. Was I ever meant to have a seat at this table? Have you ever sat through a family dinner and still felt like a stranger? If so, drop a 1. If you believe you'd never let that happen, drop a 2. I stayed another hour. The pie was untouched. No one noticed. As the night ended, Lydia rushed to walk the investors out. Caleb stepped outside to take a call. My mother leaned in and said softly, "Just make sure you clean up the dessert trays before you leave." I nodded, still polite, but something had shifted. I was no longer the person who'd step back just to be allowed to stay. I left the Flagstaff Estate that night after everyone had gone upstairs. No one walked me to the door. I drove back to the city in silence, radio still on, but no song stayed with me. On the passenger seat sat the untouched pecan pie, the cinnamon now heavy and strange. I got home close to midnight, turned on the lights, hung my coat, placed the pie on the counter without taking a bite. Something in me had changed the moment my father toasted the others and proudly said, "Because of Lydia and Caleb, the Morgan name still stands today." I opened my laptop. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. My inbox had one unread email from Anderson and Burke, the law firm that's handled our family's estate for 2 decades. I stared at the subject line, my hand already cold. Asset allocation update, Morgan Family Holdings. It was 12:06 a.m. I took a breath, clicked, no greeting. Just a clipped paragraph, sterile, the kind I used to write when I was a legal assistant, straight out of school. Per instruction from Richard Morgan Trust Fund was updated and approved on November 18th. Copies were sent to official beneficiaries. If you did not receive one, please contact within 14 days. I scrolled to the list. Lydia Morgan, operating shares 42%, Caleb Morgan, strategic shares, personnel reserve fund, temperate legal disbursement, set note, no additional allocations outside listed beneficiaries. My name wasn't there, not a line, not a footnote, no prior contributor, no discretionary inclusion, nothing. I sat still. In 2012, I emptied my entire startup savings, the first money I ever earned post-college, to help my father save the Lakewood estate from tax seizure. I never asked for it back. I didn't request ownership. I believed that if I helped when it mattered, they'd remember, that I'd been part of this, that I wasn't invisible, but now I knew. No one remembered, no one wanted to. I stood. The kitchen was cold. I poured water. It sliced down my throat like a blade. I leaned on the counter glass in hand, staring into the dark window. The city had gone to sleep. Only I remained confronting a truth that hadn't crashed loud, but broke harder than anything I'd ever heard. Have you ever been written out of something you thought you belonged to? If yes, and drop. And if you believe trust should never be misplaced, drop. And I walked to the cabinet, opened the bottom drawer beneath the bookshelf. Inside a dusty folder box where I kept old records from my time assisting the property division, I pulled out file after file: land purchase contracts, Flagstaff tax reports, valuation sheets. I prepared that no one cited. Each page reminded me I had given quietly and assumed that was enough. In a yellow file, I found it: the 2012 contribution. Sender Rachel Morgan, amount $45, $200. Date May 3rd, 2012. Recipient Morgan and Daughters Holdings. Purpose property tax relief. Lakewood. Handwritten note received. Thank you, RM. Signed by my father in blue ink. I held it, stood still, folded it neatly, slipped it into a fresh folder. Next morning I rose early, brewed coffee, wore a gray shirt, no makeup. I opened my laptop, typed a short email to an old family attorney, the man who once worked with my father when the company was new. Subject: contribution validation request, Morgan Trust. I attached the file. No emotion, no blame. Just one line: please confirm whether my 2012 financial contribution holds legal validity in the trust record. I hit send, then sat back, watched the morning light slip through the blinds. In that moment, I wasn't sad. I wasn't hoping anymore. I just wanted them to look at what they had done and not be able to look away. And the next morning, I woke before sunrise. No alarm, no coffee. I just sat up, pulled back the curtain, and let the pale light spill through the frosted glass, touching the room like it, too, was searching for something that had been forgotten. The emails from the night before played in my head, the cold voice of legal text echoing like metal dropped in a sealed room. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't sad anymore either. It felt like I had reached the end of a long road where pain no longer stung, just settled like winter frost clinging to stone, motionless, unspoken, but there. I walked into the living room. On the shelf sat a small wooden box, lightly dusted. I brought it from the old house in Prescott Valley back when I was still in high school. Inside were things I kept not for value, but because some part of me had believed if I kept them, I wouldn't be forgotten. I opened the lid. Letters I wrote to myself at 17, a few film photos, a slip of paper in my mother's handwriting. Don't forget your meds. Stop arguing with your teacher. I couldn't recall when she'd written that, but the slant of her script blue ink, soft and distant, was unmistakable. I shuffled the papers aside. At the bottom was a burgundy leather-bound journal worn at the edges. I recognized it immediately. It had followed me through 4 years of college, then got packed away the day I joined Morgan and Daughters as an unpaid intern. The first page read, "No one really listens, but I have to write so I don't lose track of myself." I turned the pages, notes about Mom skipping my graduation, the time I won the valuation contest, only to hear Lydia say, "You're too emotional for this field." Some entries were blurred. I didn't remember if it was rain tears or coffee. Probably all three. I stopped on one page, May 7th, 2012. 3 days after I wired $45, $200 to help Dad save the Lakewood property. I had written in purple ink, "I don't need anything. Just hope one day they remember I did it. Not out of duty, but love." I read that line 3 times. Then closed the journal. My hand was trembling. I couldn't recall the last time my father said thank you. Not because he wasn't polite, but because he always said things like, "It was the right thing to do." When I transferred the money, he sent one message: "Received, noted, no promises, no documents." But I believed him, and now they use that same silence to erase me. I returned to my desk, grabbed the blue folder, slipped in the wire transfer and the original agreement, labeled it Lakewood 20 Originals. Then I opened my digital records, cross-checked every email, every message, every file tied to that contribution. I had to be sure, not because I was afraid of losing, but because I would no longer allow myself to be quietly dismissed. I found an old internal email from July 2012, sent from Richard Morgan to legal counsel Rachel helped secure Lakewood. Don't include in financial reports. Keep internal. I read that line again. It was never public, but now it might be key. I copied the entire archive to a new USB drive, then backed it up on an external hard disk. Later, I called the lawyer I'd emailed that morning. His name was Alan Hart, around 60, once a peer of my father's when the company operated from a rented back room. I didn't call to plead. I just said I have original records. If mediation needs to begin, I'll initiate. He paused, then said, I remember you from your first year out, and I know you wouldn't speak unless it mattered. I didn't reply, just exhaled. That afternoon, I printed everything. No binders, no staples. I laid each page on the table, ordered by date. Every number, every signature, every ink blot. A trail of evidence, not just of finances, but of my presence, of actions they now pretend never happened. I sat down, looked at the stack. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel grief. There was only one thing left clearer than any defense, my existence. Written in ink, sealed in balance, and finally ready to be read. I didn't send a legal notice right away. No summons, no warnings. Just a letter. Simple white paper standard font signed by attorney Alan Hart. We didn't send it to the company. We sent it to my father's house. The envelope bore no subject line. Just a handwritten address in the same slanted print I once practiced all summer in 6th grade, writing thank you notes. The letter arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. That day, Lydia was hosting a pre-Christmas cocktail party, staff partners, everyone. I knew because the company's Instagram was busy. Not a single photo included me, even though I was still listed as a legal co-founder. The letter had 3 paragraphs. The first confirmed my 2012 financial contribution verified and signed by Richard Morgan. The second cited the clause titled Acknowledgement of Material Financial Contribution within the internal Morgan Trust Charter. The last line was brief. We propose a good faith discussion before proceeding with formal mediation. No one responded for 3 days. I wasn't surprised. They were used to me being quiet, compliant, then gone. They thought I was still that version. But this time, I didn't withdraw. I waited, with a lawyer, with notarized documents, and a heart that no longer needed to be included, just recognized. On day 4, Lydia emailed, no name, no greeting. Subject about your letter. 2 lines. This is a family matter. We don't believe this needs escalation. If there are concerns, perhaps meet privately to clarify. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to Alan, adding, they still think I'll stay quiet. We drafted the next letter, a formal request for non-court mediation. The attached documents were thicker notarized copies of the 2012 agreement, internal emails acknowledging the contribution, and 3 years' worth of property evaluations I prepared, never credited. 3 days later, my father called. His name lit up on my screen. I let it ring. On the 3rd call, I answered. His voice was calm, still the same tone he used during business crises. Rachel, I think this is getting too far. I didn't interrupt. He continued. I just thought back then nothing was formal, no clear agreement. We all did what we had to for the family. I waited, then said, do you remember signing it? Silence, I added. There's a copy. Your signature, internal acknowledgement. If you forgot, I can resend it all. He hesitated. His voice softened. I didn't think you'd take it legal. I looked out the window, the afternoon light beginning to dim. You made a legal decision when you removed me from the trust without notice. I'm just responding within process. He didn't say goodbye, neither did I. 2 weeks later, mediation was scheduled. Not in court. A neutral office in Scottsdale known for handling corporate internal disputes. I arrived early. Wore a plain white blouse, no accessories, no distractions, just a file bag and a pen. They arrived after me, all 3, my father, Lydia, Caleb. No one looked at me. I didn't look at them. We sat across a dark wood table, a mint water jar between us. The mediator opened reading a summary. I didn't interrupt, nor did I react when Lydia said Rachel never expressed real interest in being part of the family structure. I opened my file, took out the notarized copy, laid it on the table, didn't push it forward, just laid it. When it was my turn, I said simply, I'm not asking for money or control. I'm asking to be recognized for what I contributed. In writing, nothing more, nothing less. My father didn't object, but he didn't agree. He leaned back, hands clasped, eyes down. Lydia smirked that half smile I remembered from school. You really want to drag this out, she said. Over something 10 years old, I looked directly at her. It's not about 10 years ago. It's about erasing me and thinking I wouldn't notice. The session ended after 3 hours. No immediate settlement, but no denial either. Their attorney requested a pause to review new documents. I stepped outside as light rain began to fall. My blouse dampened, but in that I felt lighter. For the first time, I'd left a conversation without feeling erased. I had spoken, I had sat, and I had made them see me without asking for permission. That Christmas night wasn't particularly cold, no snow yet, but the air stung lightly at the wrist where my sleeve brushed skin. I hadn't planned on going back to Flagstaff. No one had invited me. After mediation, they went quiet. No emails, no calls. I knew Lydia was stalling, waiting for me to get tired to give up, but I didn't need a response. I just needed to be impossible to ignore. I received a holiday card from Alan Hart's law office. He'd handwritten one line, "Justice isn't about victory, it's about presence." I placed the card beside a small potted plant. That night I sat alone in my apartment. No overhead lights, just the amber glow from the window lamp. I made a simple dinner, roasted butternut squash soup and toasted bread with butter. No feast, no wine, no one to smile for, just me and a silence that no longer felt sad, but still, like water settling after a storm. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I opened it. A photo of the Morgan Christmas dinner table. I recognized the long wood table in the living room. Same ivory, cloth red candles, silver cutlery Mom had brought back from Europe when I was 17. 8 people seated, one empty chair. No one looked at the camera, but I knew the sender wanted me to see there was a place no one had filled. No message, no name. I guessed it was Caleb. He'd never been good at hiding, but I didn't reply. I just stared at the picture, zoomed in on the empty chair to Dad's right. That used to be mine for 10 years, even after I left the company. No one spoke when I stopped showing up, but they left the chair empty. A deliberate kind of silence. I turned off the screen, placed the phone face down. The wind whispered through the window cracks, carrying a scent like cold wood and fading asters. I stood, poured more tea, and stepped onto the balcony. From there, I saw other balconies lit up, families gathered around tables. Some played carols. Laughter drifted into the air. I didn't feel left out. This wasn't my first Christmas alone, but this year I wasn't pretending to be fine or hoping someone would notice I was. The next day, I visited Alan Hart's office. No appointment. But he welcomed me with peppermint tea and a glance that didn't need questions. I sat down, opened my bag, and placed a white envelope on his desk. Inside were the new documents I'd gathered, including a recording of the call with my father, where he said back then things weren't clear. That sentence placed beside signed contracts and dated receipts wasn't denial, it was proof he knew. And he'd chosen silence. Alan said little, he skimmed the pages, then nodded. This will work for the next mediation round. It's strong. I looked at him and said, I don't need them to admit it out loud. I just need them to know I'm no longer someone they decide whether to include. Before I left, he asked, if they offer minor shares or a private apology, would you accept? I shook my head. No, I'm not bargaining. I'm not looking for kindness. I'm here to reclaim what I built through proof, not sentiment. On December 27th, I received an email from Morgan's legal assistant. We'd like to resume mediation, proposing to renegotiate indirect ownership terms. I didn't respond immediately. I took a walk. The park ground was damp from melting snow. Evening light bounced softly off the pavement. Inside me, there was no hope, just a steady rhythm like footsteps across bricks. That night, I replied with an attachment, a counterproposal. Only 2 items, 1 written recognition of my 2012 financial contribution as equal in weight, 2 founding shares, and 2 my name reinstated in Morgan and Daughter's internal founder registry. No press release, no public announcement, just one line of record to set the history right. I clicked send, then turned off the lights. The room dimmed, lit only by streetlight through the curtain. I sat in my reading chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't seeking to be understood. I only needed to be seen. That was enough. On the morning of January 3rd, an unexpected appointment landed in my inbox. Subject meeting, off-the-record proposal. The sender was Arthur LaRue, my father's former private attorney. He used to handle the family's estate conflicts in the early 2000s, then semi-retired, taking only long-time clients. The message was brief. In true Arthur-style Richard left behind a document. If you're ready, come to the old office. 10 a.m. Thursday. I read it again and again, not because I doubted it, but because I wasn't sure what emotion was rising in me. Not hope, not caution, just something thin and cool, like touching the back of a printed page that still holds faint warmth. You know it won't last. Arthur's office sat in a red brick 3-story building with a sloped roof. It hadn't changed much since I'd last been there as a college intern, helping my mom file equity revisions during her dispute with my aunt. The reception desk was still walnut wood grain, shaped like rings. The light still cast that soft amber glow. I sat on the leather chair and nodded at the frail woman behind the desk. She pointed to the door on the right without saying a word. Arthur stood waiting, his back slightly more hunched than before, but his eyes sharp. He didn't shake hands, just gestured to the seat across from him, then quietly placed a thick envelope on the desk. This is Richard's final addendum, signed last February when he was admitted to the hospital. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. Arthur continued. He told me, sent it one day you wanted the part of the truth. He never had the courage to say, let it begin here. I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the familiar script of my father's, slightly shaky but unmistakable. The first page read, "For you, Rachel, not because I need forgiveness, but because you deserve to know you weren't wrong." I didn't cry, but something in my chest let go like a rubber band stretched for years that had finally been released. I kept reading. Below was a notarized legal addendum signed off by Arthur, a reaffirmation of my 2000 financial contribution, formal recognition of my co-ownership in the company's internal records. And one final line, if my family can't do what's right, then let the law preserve the truth. I looked up. Arthur was still watching me, not with pity, not with curiosity, just with the gaze of someone who's worked too long with the legacies of human decisions to know sometimes acknowledgement is more powerful than inheritance. I thanked him carefully, folding each page and sliding them into my case. As I left, I paused at the framed photo in the hallway, a Morgan family portrait from 2005. I was in it then, wearing a black dress, standing between my mother and Lydia. No one's hand on my shoulder. I stared for a long moment, then turned and walked away. That afternoon, I stopped by a quiet cafe downtown, dimly lit, jazz playing faintly from wall speakers. I opened my case, laid out the documents, and sequenced the 2012 bank transfer mediation records, and finally my father's original. I photographed them, saved them to a secured folder, then began drafting an email. To Lydia's attorney. Subject line, the original, undeniable. I didn't explain. No preface, no emotional appeal. Just the documents attached, a single note legally verified. We are ready to close the final mediation. After hitting send, I sat back. My coffee had gone cold, but for the first time, the cold didn't touch me. That evening, I returned home, took off my coat, hung it on the hook by the door. That hook had been loose for years. I'd always meant to replace it. Never did. Still hadn't, but I didn't care. I took the original document, slipped it into a clear folder, and labeled it, "The Truth, No Permission Needed." I didn't need them to admit anything. I didn't need remorse. I just needed to know they no longer had the authority to define my existence. And from tomorrow on, nothing would be rewritten without my name on it. The following Monday at 6:42 a.m., I received an email I almost missed. No caps in the subject line. No bold sender name, just 3 simple words, forwarded from Arthur. I opened it while waiting for coffee to brew in the kitchen, expecting nothing, just assuming it was more files Arthur was passing along. But the contents made me freeze my hand, still holding the spoon mid-stir. The email came from a backup address, Richard Organ Legal Archive, not on the family firm's main records, but one he often used to store drafts and unfinished documents. The first line read simply, "Rachel, if you're reading this email, I may no longer have the chance to see you in person." I sat down on the wooden chair by the window, opened my laptop for a larger screen. What followed was a personal memorandum just over 2.5 pages. Unstructured, but unmistakably clear in its intent. She says that my father had written it after our first mediation session while undergoing early-stage heart treatment. He admitted to participating in the 2021 company charter amendment during the period I was hospitalized after the accident. He wrote, "At the time, Lydia said Rachel wouldn't be stable enough to manage assets. I stayed silent, not because you weren't capable, but because I was too tired to argue." The next line was the one that stopped my breath. "You were the only one of my 3 children who ever asked if I was hungry after a long board meeting. I didn't answer, just nodded, but I remember it clearly." The document continued, "I don't leave these words to stir chaos. I leave them so that if you ever have to stand before everyone, you can say he knew and he did not deny it." At the end was an attachment, a scanned page of handwriting slightly shaky but clean. It read, "Acknowledge financial contribution. Acknowledge executive capacity. Acknowledge founding role. No conditions," dated 3 days after the first mediation session. I reread the entire file 3 times. Every word seemed to carve into spaces inside me I thought had healed. But this time there were no tears, no choking up. Just a strange calm, like a door I had been banging on for years had finally been opened from the inside. No key, no force, just opened. I printed the entire document, slid it into its own folder, and labeled it undeniable. That afternoon, I received an email from Lydia's legal office. The tone had shifted, no longer evasive, no more hollow offers of mediation. Instead, a formal invitation to a live meeting with the presence of the inheritance representative HR division and 2 silent partners. I replied simply, "I'll be there, and this time I'll speak fully." That evening, I made peppermint tea and stepped onto my balcony. The city remained lit, same repeating sounds, car horns, faint music from somewhere, voices calling from opposite balconies. But to me, it all felt quieter, as if even the wind had paused, waiting for the final line to be spoken. I pulled out the file, arranged the pages. I didn't need to embellish. I didn't need anger. I didn't need to prove I was right. I just needed to read. Read each line Richard had written, nothing added, nothing subtracted. And after that, I would place the file on the table, leave the boardroom, and let them sit with a truth that could no longer be rewritten. The final meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at 9 a.m. on the 15th floor of Morgan & Daughters, the same building where I worked for the first 7 years of my career. I arrived 15 minutes early as always, not to prove anything, just a habit that had never been broken. The receptionist recognized me. No greeting, no hesitation. She picked up the phone, dialed a familiar number, then nodded slightly. I walked straight into meeting room 2, where light from the large windows angled across the long table, each chair aligned perfectly. I placed my folder on the table unopened, sat still, waiting. In those few quiet minutes, I glanced around the room. The landscape painting had changed. The chairs were newly upholstered, the curtains a different color. But the smell was the same polished wood and the sterile chill of early air conditioning. This was the room where I'd once been told to stay late and review payroll, just so Lydia wouldn't lose the spotlight to a newer intern. At exactly 9 a.m., they entered. Lydia led, followed by their attorney and 2 stakeholders. My mother appeared last, barefaced, holding her old brown leather purse. She sat directly across from me, saying nothing, just watching. Lydia spoke first. "We'd like to clarify a few terms before signing the updated agreement." I nodded, didn't interrupt. Their attorney glanced my way before saying, "It appears Ms. Rachel's claims are supported by original documentation from Richard Morgan. We confirm the legal validity of that content." I opened the folder, pulled out 3 pages. No explanation. I slid them across the table toward the attorney. "These are for your finance department. If the revisions aren't signed within 7 days, I'll forward the documents to the Regional Corporate Oversight Board." My tone wasn't raised, not fast, not threatening. Yet the room went silent, as if every sound had been swallowed whole. Lydia leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. I still don't get why you're clinging to things no one even remembers. I didn't look at her. I said, because I don't need them to remember. I need the truth not to disappear. My mother shifted slightly, her hand resting on the table. If you need an apology, I think I can say it now. I turned, looked her in the eye. No, I don't need an apology. I just need you to stop pretending you didn't see anything. Their attorney took notes. The two stakeholders signed their neutral confirmations. I picked up the pen and signed my name. Then I stood. No one stopped me. No one said, "Thank you for coming." I didn't expect them to. I walked out of the meeting like someone finishing a long shift. No victory, no fanfare, just done. Like a final door closing behind me, soft but definite. I exited the building, stepping onto the gray stone tiles where morning sunlight filled the space with the clean warmth. The city was still loud, still moving, but inside me something had gone still. Not empty, just no longer needing to be filled. That evening, I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't call Nora. I didn't email Arthur. I just came home, hung up my coat, washed my hands, made a small bowl of soup, and ate quietly. Not because I was sad, because I was at peace. I took the file again, sealed it in a plastic sleeve, then placed it in the safe unlabeled. No name needed. Whoever needed it would know where to look, and if no one looked, that was fine too. Revenge had never been the point. I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted to stop needing permission to exist. And that day, as the boardroom door clicked shut behind me, I knew I had. 1 week after the final meeting, I received an invitation from Harmony Collective, a nonprofit I had once volunteered for as a college student. They support women who've been erased from family systems or family-run businesses. They were holding a community talk at the city library, and the theme was women and the roles they were erased from. I sat with the invitation for a long time, not out of hesitation, but because I knew if I said yes, I wouldn't just be telling a story, I'd be closing it. And this time in my own voice. On Saturday, the event was held in an old reading room. High wooden ceilings, stained glass windows cast in soft light. The audience sat in a quiet semicircle. I wore a plain white shirt, no jewelry, my hair pulled back neatly. On the table, just a stack of papers and a glass of water. No mic, no podium, just me and about 30 silent faces waiting. I began with a simple sentence. There are women whose names are never spoken at family dinners, and if you're here, maybe you've been one of them too. No one nodded, no one clapped, but the silence was deep enough that I knew they understood. I told my story. I didn't name anyone. I didn't describe anyone as a villain. I spoke of a daughter who worked twice as hard to be seen half as much. I spoke of wills that never included her, dinners where the empty chair was never meant for her, meetings where she was invited but never counted. I didn't cry. I didn't need to hold anything back. I simply spoke word by word, like every syllable was a step backward into the past, only to turn and walk straight into the present. Near the end, I pulled a small folded paper from my pocket. It was the scanned note in my father's handwriting. I held it up, didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to move anyone. I just said I spent years waiting for someone to call my name. But today I'll say it myself, Rachel Morgan, co-founder, survivor, and the one who is beginning again. I nodded gently. There was no rushed applause, just one woman who stood up, then another, then the whole room standing quietly without a word, as if everyone understood that some moments don't need clapping. You just stand because finally someone stood up for themselves. That evening, I walked through the Central Park. The wind was crisp, bare trees and their winter silhouettes. I stopped by a small bookstore and bought a new journal. When I got home, I opened to the first page. I didn't write anything yet. I just pasted in an old photo of me at 9 years old, hair messy, holding a red notebook. And next to it, I taped a single sentence, no longer the extra. Now the beginning. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to be understood. I just needed to keep writing on pages that were mine at last. Silence is not weakness. Silence is what happens when you no longer need to shout to be seen. It's the strength to stand in the spaces where chairs were never pulled out for you, where eyes look past you and still not lose who you are. Some truths don't need validation. Some victories don't need applause. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is walk away, not out of anger, but because they know they deserve a different place, a different path. If you've ever been overlooked, cast aside, even after giving your best and still managed to rise, still chose to keep going, then this story is yours too. Have you ever lived something like Rachel did? If so, leave a comment. Just one line might make someone out there feel a little less alone. Thank you for staying until the very end, and 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 until